The other day I was on the phone with my friend for about 2.5 hours, and we just talked ball the entire time, and it was good for the soul. You just need that every once in a while. And if you like those kind of conversations, you're in the right place today. So welcome into Saturday Cadence, the heartbeat of college football. I am Blake Biscardi, joined by TJ Warner, and we are going to talk national college football all day. Who are the contenders? Who are the pretenders? What team could fall from the AP preseason top 10 by the end of the year? Who are the names and the teams that you need to know? So let's hop right into the show. TJ, man, we got football. We're days away from football. We've got a lot to talk about today. So welcome into the show.
Yeah, week 0's coming up, and right around the corner before we know it, playoff seeds will be aligned here then in December, and we'll be ready to go.
That's exactly right. But before we get into all the playoff seeding and who's going to make the bracket and all, we got to talk about these teams, TJ. There's a handful of contenders to some, a lot more contenders to others, upwards of 20 teams in some sense, and then some have it down to just 5 or 6. But let's talk about these guys, TJ. So we look at this AP poll. I'm going to bring it up on screen for us really quickly. 9 SEC teams and then 8 Big Ten teams to start. So that is 17 of the top 25 teams from 2 conferences, independent Notre Dame as well. So that is 18 of 25 spots taken up by the leading 2 conferences plus Notre Dame. Ohio State 1, Oregon 2, Georgia 3, Notre Dame at 4, and then Texas at 5 to start. TJ, the Big Ten. They have won the last 3 national championships. And this conference has overtaken the SEC as the premier conference in college football. And it's been better at the top end, while the argument for the SEC is they have the depth. My first question to you before we talk about team by team specifically is, do you think that's still going to be true this year? Do you think it's going to be more top heavy for the Big Ten, more depth in the SEC? Do you think that's going to switch? When you look at those conferences side by side, how do you evaluate those two here as we stand just days away from week 0?
I think the big thing for the Big Ten recently is they're adding more quality teams at the top. I think there's a good tier of quality teams at the top, not 2 or 3 teams anymore. There's a little bit bigger chunk. But I think the big thing for the Big Ten recently is that middle of the pack of the Nebraska and Iowas and Minnesotas of the world. They've gotten a lot better to where it feels like they can compete with some of those teams at the top and put them on upset alerts on any given Saturday nowadays. So I think that's where the Big Ten's kind of improved. Now, do I think the bottom end of the Big Ten can compete with the bottom end of the SEC? Probably not. I don't think they're at that point yet. But I think overall the conference is getting deeper. There is a little bit larger of a group of teams at the top end that have the elite national contender title hopes as well. I think that bucket of teams is a little bit bigger than it has been in years past. And, SEC, do they have as big of a bucket at the top end of their conference? I don't think that's true this year. So I think Big Ten has more quality teams at the top. I think they're getting better in the middle. And then if they pick up the bottom end of that conference, then there'll be no doubt in the next 2 or 3 years that the Big Ten's the best conference in college football right now.
TJ, who's the class of the Big Ten right now? Michigan won the national championship in 23, Ohio State 24, Indiana in 25, and the Hoosiers did beat the Buckeyes a year ago. So as you look at the Big Ten this year, what team is still the class and the standard? Is it still Ohio State? Does Indiana assume that title now, being the defending national champions and having beaten the Buckeyes in the conference title game a year ago? Is it Oregon this year? I don't know that they're deserving because they've not won a game to garner that kind of praise. But as you look at the top end of this Big Ten, what is the team that everyone's chasing?
I don't know if it's a single team. That's the hard part with the NIL era and the roster acquisition that every team goes through every single year. It's just there's so many new faces and so many new names that it's kind of hard to pinpoint. All right, this is the team everyone's chasing in each conference this year, especially in the Big Ten and SEC. Because like I said earlier, it's kind of a bucket of teams, and I think you can put the last 3 national championship teams in there. I think you can throw Oregon in there. I think you can throw USC in there. Two West Coast teams, maybe even Penn State can be in there with that schedule and the completely new landscape that roster looks like this year too. So it's more so a bucket of teams, not really one team, just because of the new era of college football that we're in nowadays.
So Ohio State starts the year at number 1, maybe a surprise to some, but the Buckeyes, TJ, they've lost 25 draft picks in the last 2 seasons, 11 a year ago. They welcome 51 new faces, a new offensive coordinator. How in the world can they be ranked number 1 after losing all that? What is it about Ohio State that the voters are trusting here, saying, well, we look around the country and all we're hearing about is Texas and Oregon, how this is their year, and then Notre Dame, is this finally when they win the big one? But yet, TJ, Ohio State's number one. Why are the Buckeyes ranked number one? And what is it about Ohio State's roster this year that makes you a believer in them as a contender?
I think it's more so the coaching staff more than the roster. I think that's a big unsung hero that people aren't talking about. The trust they have in the overall coaching staff and Coach Day proving that he can do it 2 years ago, bringing in experience at defense coordinator last year with Coach Patricia, obviously seeing how that worked out, remaining the number one defense in college football, and then bringing in another NFL head coach in Arthur Smith for OC. It's just it's gonna fit the scheme that Ohio State wants to play, just to another heightened level with Arthur Smith's little wrinkles that he can throw in that offense as well. So I think it's more so they're believing in the coaching staff, and they just know that Ohio State recruits at such a high level. They just reload anyways. Like there's not many teams that recruit on the level Ohio State do. It's a very small handful of teams, maybe 10 at most. Um, but Ohio State's going to reload, and they're going to find their guys, and whoever those guys are that are going to play on Saturdays are going to be able to compete with the best of them. It's just who Ohio State is at the end of the day. And I think people believe in the coaching staff more than the roster. Of course, there's the big names of Jeremiah Smith and the Heisman finalist last year, Julian Saint at quarterback for year two. We expect them to take that big jump in year two at quarterback. But they lose a lot of faces on defense. But people aren't really like, I guess, worried about the defense as well, just because Coach Patricia and the guys that they have coming back with experience in certain positions, they think they're going to take the next step. And then some of those transfers, they expect them to take big roles here in the next couple weeks.
That was going to be the point, TJ, that I brought up where you're talking about Ohio State doesn't rebuild, they have to reload. And Ryan Day said that there's no rebuilding of anything around here. The standard's the standard. And that defense is expected to be the number one defense in the country. And it's the same thing with the offense. And you look at that defense, yes, under Coach Patricia, it was the number one unit a year ago, and he's back again. And he's now had a hand in assembling that roster rather than inheriting a really talented group of players. And they do feel good about the transfers that they've hit, but also the talent that they have developed here in Columbus. But again, TJ, is Matt Patricia that valuable of a coordinator where you can say we had 4 defensive players drafted in the first 33 picks of the NFL draft, 3 in the top 11, yet this defense people are still believing in can be one of the best units in the country. The talk about Ohio State's defense is not, well, can they be top 15? Can they be top 20? Can they do enough to let Jeremiah Smith and Julian Saint do their thing on that offense? They returned 4 or 5 offensive line starters. You have Bo Jackson, Isaiah West in that backfield. Legend Bay will be a Swiss Army knife piece. The young pieces and Chris Henry Jr. and Brock Board. You go on and on about the talent on this offense for Ohio State. But yet the defense is still the driving part of that conversation where people think that this could be a top defense again in college football. So I'm with you that I think the coaching staff is the big value add for Ohio State, and that's separated. And I think the leadership component of that from, yes, the head coach coordinator combination, but also the head coach quarterback combination they hit and they check those boxes. And Ohio State named 7 captains. And I think as you bring in 51 new players, you need leadership across the board. Ohio State has 6 of its 9 position groups mentioned as team captains. So I think that's really important too, because it's across the board. It's not just, hey, your best players. You have 6 of your 9 position groups have a representation in that room, 2 at wide receiver. So Grant again, or TJ again, is it that valuable to have Matt Patricia be the defensive coordinator for you, losing all that production and then still maintain those expectations because of the scheme that he brings along? And I think that's the big separator from Ohio State's defense and Ohio State's offense now this year with those NFL coordinators, that it'll be the scheme more so than the personnel and the players, which are still elite.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the value that everyone's seeing. And he came in year one, and at that point, they're like, "Oh my God, they lost so many seniors and fifth-year players to the draft this past year." Obviously, they weren't as high picked as some of these ones in this recent year. But Jack Sawyer, JTT, just to name a few off that defensive line, Tyleik Williams as well. But they replaced those guys and went right at it again, and looked great up front. And obviously the Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese proved to be really good last year as well. And I think that that's something that's just going to be a common nature for Ohio State, is they're going to have a couple guys that might be juniors or seniors playing for their first time, and they're going to have breakout years and go be high NFL draft picks. I think that's just the type of system that they're playing in with the type of recruits that they bring in. They just recruit on such a high level that they're going to have those type of athletes, and they can just plug and play them wherever they want to.
TJ, Ohio State's schedule is among the most difficult in the country. Of all the contenders we're going to talk about, it's probably Ohio State and Texas that face the toughest roads to get to where they need to go, and they've got to play each other. So you look at the Buckeyes and you see how that schedule shakes up. Is this a team that has to be 11-1 to get into the playoff? Do you think they could be 10-2? Do you think they have an argument at 9-3? Like when you look at Ohio State and how they project into this season, where do you see the Buckeyes finishing the regular season, then looking into championship weekend into the college football playoff? Like, do you think this team can go coast to coast at number one? Do you think they're going to stumble a couple times within that schedule and they're going to continue to improve? Like, how do you evaluate the Buckeyes from where we're standing here in August before we've kicked off the ball to now we fast forward to December? What does that period look like for Ohio State?
But we're going to learn a lot about them week 2, obviously, when they travel down to Austin and play the Texas Longhorns in a tough road atmosphere at night. We're gonna learn a lot about that, the landscape of the Big Ten versus SEC. Everyone's going to overreact to that as well. The winner of that is, that conference going to have bragging rights for the rest of the year until playoffs come. That's how it's going to go. Unfortunately, no matter the outcome, no matter if it's Texas winning or Ohio State winning, that's just going to how it's going to be. But back to Ohio State, I think they can go 10-2 this year, and still be comfortably in the playoffs. 9-3, I think it depends on what those 3 losses look like, and they might be able to squeak in at the very last spot. I think the thing to think about though is, they have to have 5 conference champions in this still. That's not going away. But if Notre Dame's also ranked in the top 12, they have to be in it as well this year. It's not going to be the case of if Notre Dame's ranked 12, they cannot make it in because the G5 winner has to come in. That won't be the case this year. Notre Dame will be in. So I think it's a little trickier to go 9-3 and be in for Ohio State this year. It just depends on how those 3 losses look and how the rest of the college football landscape looks. But I would say that they would probably have a pretty good argument still at 9-3, depending on if they can pull off one of these other big wins as well, and then kind of stumble late against a somewhat inferior opponent.
I'm with you there on all accounts on the Buckeyes. I think 10-2, they're still comfortably at 9-3. They have an argument. Obviously, anything better than that, they're 100% in. And that's just about what seed are they going to have. Is it hosting a playoff game? Or are they getting a bye? Where do the Buckeyes fall there? I think if they're 1 loss or better, that they are in one of those top 4 seeds come December. TJ, we just talked about Ohio State and Texas have to play each other. Let's go Texas. Here, you know what? We'll stick with the Big Ten. We're going to roll with the Big Ten. Oregon is the other contender here at the top, man. So they're number 2 in the AP poll. You've got Dante Moore at quarterback. Dan Lanning, though, has to replace both coordinators. But Oregon probably, and you can make the argument that they have the most talented roster on paper across college football. So when you look at the Ducks, how do you evaluate Dan Lanning's team this year? It's really difficult to replace both coordinators, but is the gap between the skill they have on the field and the coaching staff, do you think you can close that by the product they're going to put on the field? Like, how big of an impact is it going to be to replace both coordinators?
Well, they hired within, so that I think that could prove to be. Well, I guess we'll see how that proves out to be, but I think that could help in Oregon's case, kind of have the similar system and feel to it for these players in this roster in particular. 2 years down the road, that might look out to be a really bad decision for Dan Lanning. But for this roster this year in particular, I think that could actually turn out to be better for that continuity and the continued development and plan that they had in place before those 2 coordinators left. Obviously, 2 guys that went to go join really good programs, and can't fault them for leaving for that aspect of it. But like you said, roster on paper is probably the most talented, or has at least an argument for to be the most talented. I think there's 3 teams in that bucket for me, and it's Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame that have the most talent on paper. We'll see what that does on the field on Saturdays, but on paper, those are the top 3 teams for me. Oregon, though, like when you walk through there, it's like what are the biggest question marks? And I don't think there's a huge question mark anywhere. I think the big thing that I look at is this offense is going to be elite, like very, very much so elite. They bring back all the key pieces they need to. That offense line is still going to be pretty good. That wide receiver core has a chance to be said that the best in the country. It's that deep from top to bottom. Obviously, they bring back a couple running backs as well that are going to be really good. Obviously, headlined by the quarterback of Dante Moore. But that defensive line is, I would go ahead and go on record to say Oregon's defensive line is the best in country heading into this 2026 season. And that's something that's going to help out the rest of the defense throughout the whole season. And that's one that they're going to be really deep, both inside and out. that people need to be aware of real quickly. That Oregon's defense line is kind of like Miami's of last year, one that you have to game plan around. You have to get the ball out quick, and you have to design runs to get to the next level. But it's going to be really hard to do that no matter what, because that defense line is that good.
TJ, you're hitting on Oregon's defensive line. That's the place that I go immediately when I think of this team. You talk about the offensive talent. Yes, it's in the category of elite. Talk about Dan Lanning. Yes, we know the big game struggles there, but this year just feels different for them. They've been building towards this. That defensive line, man, like that we saw. You mentioned it with Miami. I think that's a great comparison there where they may not be the better team, even though very few teams can say that they're better than Oregon this year, statistically on paper. But if Oregon finds themselves where they're not the better team on a given day and the offense is having an off day, but that defensive line's not, you're not going to notice because Oregon's going to be in that game. They are game wreckers up front. Mateo Uiagalelei is going to lead that unit again, coming off the edge. And that team, that unit in particular, like if you're talking about Ohio State in comparison to Oregon or Indiana in comparison to Oregon, you can make the arguments all day long that Ohio State and Indiana can go ahead and beat Oregon. But again, if Ohio State's offensive line doesn't take that step forward this year, they need to. We know what happens when they're matched up against a defensive line like Oregon has. If Indiana and what they have to replace, if that doesn't gel the right way and then they end up playing each other and their offensive line's not getting it done, Oregon can just take over the game from that defensive line. And then on the offensive side of the ball, you have DeCarry Moore and Evan Stewart at wide receiver, plus Dante Moore at quarterback. He's a Heisman contender as well. Offensive line, you got to replace a little bit, but again, they're still going to be strong because of how they've recruited. This is talent everywhere. There's such a big compilation of 5 stars all across this roster. They have great recruiting class averages over the last couple of seasons, but also transfer portal averages. I think that's one of the separators with Oregon is that, yes, they're recruiting at a high level, but they're acquiring talent from the transfer portal at a high level. And then, TJ, the third component of that triangle, they've retained talent that could have gone to the NFL. You see blueprint after blueprint of teams that have won the title in the last couple of years in this Big Ten run. Michigan was veteran. Ohio State was veteran. Indiana was veteran. Oregon is now veteran. So could this be the year that Ohio State and Indiana, yes, they're great, but Oregon takes that step and says, now we're going to make this 4 in a row for the Big Ten with 4 different teams to win the national title. Do you think that is something that we could be saying here as a January headline?
I think it's definitely true. They're probably in my top 5 bucket of if I had to place money on a national championship winner today, I would have Oregon in that bucket for sure, be considering them. I think the thing that really sticks out for me too is not only just that defensive line, that defense in general. That secondary, it's going to be absolutely studs all across that field too, because they brought the transfer in from Minnesota, Coy Parrish. He's going to be in the back end of that secondary, and then also Brandon Finney Jr. I mean, he was one of the premier freshmen last year. He's a huge, big body, 6'4" corner that will be in Leonard Moore conversations this time next year and be a bona fide top 5 pick. Go ahead and bookmark that one. He's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL. He just can't go this year because he's going to be a sophomore. That's just how it's going to be. So Oregon's got players all across, and like you mentioned, that receiver room, it doesn't stop at those top 2. I mean, Jeremiah McClellan's an absolute dog as well, and they have some backups that have some speed, like Gatlin Blair that came out of high school recently too. Those are some guys to keep a name on, and then obviously Jordan Davison at running back is one to watch out for Oregon. But Dan Lanning, can he get over the hump? Can this be the year that he does it? I think if there's ever a year for Oregon, this is the year for him. Just because it just feels like all the pieces are lining up perfectly for Oregon. So if it's not this year, what is it for Dan Lanning? I don't know, but it's turning out to be a check mark year for Oregon. Of like, all right, let's go put all of our eggs in one basket and try to get it done this year.
If not now, then when, I think is the headline that you read right now in August for the Ducks. I think you put it perfectly. And I know I said we were going to transition to Texas there. I got a little bit excited, guys. We're talking National College Football. It's right there. We're sticking in the Big Ten. I told you it's going to be like a phone call with the boys. Listen, we got excited. It's okay. We're going to go to Indiana. We'll get to the SEC. I know all of you guys down south will get to the SEC. But the premier conference is being spoken about right now. So Indiana, TJ. Can Indiana do it again? I think they're even still, like, they start the season at number 6. And people are outraged, like, why is the defending national champions at 6? Is there still brand bias here for Indiana? Can they do it again? That's the big question to me. So leading into Indiana, that's where I stand with them. Can they do it again?
I think they I think there's a chance, yes, and they're bringing some guys back from this national championship team that have now got an extra year of eligibility. Let's not count that out. Some of these guys that weren't NFL ready, I guess, but their time was up in college. I mean, they're coming back for another year eligibility and could end up being NFL ready this time next year. But yes, I think Josh Hoover is a quarterback that people look at that's like, that's. I mean, he had a lot of interception problems last year. Like, is he the guy? But he's a very talented guy that played really big time ball in the Big 12. But I think he just fits that Indiana scheme so perfectly with the RPO looks that he runs. Yes, he had turnover problems last year, but that's something that I believe in Kurt Signetti and that staff of he turns those guys around really quickly, and I just think Josh Hoover. If there's ever a team that just makes the most sense transfer wise, if there's ever one player out there all year this past year that just makes the most sense transfer wise, it's Josh Hoover to Indiana. Just fits that scheme perfectly, and I think with Kurt Signetti, as long as they clean up some of that turnover issues, which I'd be shocked if that doesn't get a lot better this year. Um, that's going to be one of the most biggest and impactful transfers of the college football landscape this year. And then Nick Marsh coming in as well to be a receiver. He still has Charlie Becker, and they're going to have a dynamic duo out there. And I'm sure another receiver is going to emerge as the season goes on that maybe some national eyes don't really know about yet, but people close to Indiana are already talking about. And then that defense is just the scheme. It doesn't seem like, I don't say never, but last year it doesn't feel like they have the athletes per se on that defensive side of the ball. But man, that scheme doesn't matter. They're always in the right place at the right time, and they don't need 5-star athletes to go out there and win the games. They just need guys that know where to be at the right time. And I think that defensive coordinator he's got it figured out. And Kurt Signetti's kept him alongside him for a long time for a good reason. And Indiana's still a player in this national contender race for sure.
So Brian Haynes, man, it's like he's coordinating that defense, and you sit there and you're like, it's going to be good.
Yep.
He has earned that respect, and that's safe to
Mm-hmm.
say. And even going back to the offensive side of the ball, like you talked about Nick Marsh, that was one of the guys I wanted to hit on too. Coming in from Michigan State last year, it was Elijah Surratt and Charlie Becker. Now it's Charlie Becker and Nick Marsh. And you bring in Josh Hoover into the picture. There's a lot of talent that's sitting there on Indiana's offense.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're talking about the scheme that they run. But I think one of those questions that when you look at, yes, we talk about the scheme, yes, we talk about some personnel there, but there was a toughness and an X factor that Indiana had last year with Fernando Mendoza of what he could do with his legs and the toughness that he instilled. And we know that play in the national championship game where he had to run for it for the first down, he ended up evading some tacklers, running over some tacklers, running through some tacklers, and then diving across the goal line into the end zone. Picture looked like Superman. Does Josh Hoover have an ability similar to that? No one's going to duplicate exactly what Mendoza did for him last year. But how different or how similar are Josh Hoover to Fernando Mendoza? Because, again, still for people, when they look at Indiana as a national champion, you might be like, okay, did I wake up from a dream? Is that going to happen again? Is that a one-off? And then Indiana's starting the season ranked 6th. But, TJ, you're telling me right now I should be a believer in Indiana. So when I look at Indiana, I want to try to learn about Indiana and realize why I should believe in Indiana. I got to start the quarterback position because we know Kurt Signetti has earned the right to be among the top coaches in the country, maybe even number one. We'll get to that in a little bit. But Josh Hoover to Fernando Mendoza, how do they compare?
I think Josh Hoover is more of a mobile dual threat option than Mendoza was. Mendoza was a capable runner. That was a tough, gritty guy that would go get extra yards if he needed to. Josh Hoover's a legitimate run threat that people don't know about, I guess, as much. Kind of like the transition from Will Howard at Kansas State to Ohio State. I mean, he's a legitimate run threat when he needs to be, and Josh Hoover's the same way, just with a little bit faster pace than both those guys. But I think it's more so, can he operate this offense at a high level that Fernando Mendoza did? Can he make the right consistent reads? Because Mendoza was just really good at that last year, and he was really good at having that chemistry with his receivers to throw those back shoulder passes in those critical situations when it's like, all right, we're going to throw a 50-50 ball, and if our guy gets it, we're winning this game, like type situations. Can Josh Hoover have those plays this year and convert on those plays this year with his receivers? That's the biggest question. But I don't think there's as much of a drop off in talent wise as people are asking. Yes, Mendoza went number 1 overall in the NFL draft for a good reason. He's a talented quarterback. He's going to be a talented quarterback in the NFL. I don't think there's as much of a drop off as people are saying with Josh Hoover. in this system, just because I think he fits the mold of that system so good.
I think different's a word that you can use here. People, I think, need to get comfortable with using that word different. It's, yes, you have last year's team and you have this year's team. You can put them head to head. And you could say, well, there's talent here and there's talent there. It could be the same level of talent. It just might look different.
Yeah,
and I
100%.
think that's the case for Indiana there. It's just going to look a little bit different. The talent's still there. The potential is still there. But again, can they do that again? TJ Kurt Signetti wins a national championship last year. That rebuild was as quick of a rebuild that's ever happened across any sport, let alone just college football. It's one of the great stories in sports. Can they do it again? I know that's what we led with when we started talking about them, but I think Kurt Signetti has earned the respect to believe that they can do it again. The question is, how do they do it again? So what is going to be the method now for Signetti? Because Indiana was chasing something last year. There's nothing left to chase beside the word again for the Hoosiers. So how do you chase again?
I think the big thing for them is they still don't have the national respect that they feel like they should have. And that's where they feel like they have a chip on their shoulder. Like you said at the beginning, defending national champions, ranked 6th in the AP poll, and they feel like they have as much of a talented roster as they did last year, but they're ranked 6th when they proved they could do it last year. I think you go ahead and put Kurt Signetti in that Saban talk if he does it again back to back this quickly at one of the worst programs in college football history at this point. Like Indiana, let's just call a spade a spade. Like Indiana was one of the worst college football programs when Kurt Signetti stepped into that role, and they was able to completely change that, take them to the playoffs year one, win the national championship year two, and if he goes back to back and wins it year three, I'm sorry, but you're putting him in. I know Saban's a legendary coach and the greatest college football coach of all time, but you start putting Signetti in that conversation of this is the greatest turnaround and rebuild of all time. And Signetti has the chance to do that this year. And I think that's what he's got to instill into his team of, all right, people are still doubting us, even though we showed them we could do it last year. Go prove them wrong again. And I think that's a chip on their shoulder that he knows how to fire those guys up, and he knows how to make sure they always have a chip on their shoulder that they have to feel like they need to prove something. And I don't think that's going to be any different this year.
The best coaches are always elite at finding the mental edge. And again, finding a chip to put on their team's shoulder to know what they're chasing and why. But TJ, who is the best coach in college football right now? Is it Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, Kurt Signetti, somebody else? Like, where is that list easy to define? Maybe I won't pin you against the wall and say, tell me who's number one, but is that easy to define right now in the sport across college football, saying who really is the number one coach in the country?
I think 2 years ago the answer would have clearly clearly Kirby Smart. I think 2 years in the present, like now, I guess. Fast forward to now, I think there's 3 coaches in that mind of Kirby Smart, Ryan Day, and Kurt Signetti. I think this next year will really tell us, I guess, who's that guy. I think without NIL era, Kirby Smart would easily kind of run into that next Nick Saban type dynasty. I think we were really on track for that. An NIL era kind of saved college football from going down to a 10-year Georgia dynasty, where it's kind of even the playing field a little bit, and Georgia's not getting the number one class every single year like they did for like 4 or 5 years in the recruiting cycle. But I think it's those 3. I don't know if I can name one. Personally, I'd love to say Ryan Day, but I don't know if I can say that's the case. But I don't know. I just think the turnaround that Signetti did, if I had to choose one, I think it'd be Sig, just because the turnaround he did at Indiana. I don't think if you put Kirby Smart or Ryan Day into that position that they could make the playoffs and then win a national championship in year 2 at Indiana. I don't think either of those 2 guys could do it. So just because of that, I would say Sig, but I don't know. Like, it's still, I don't know if I can say, oh, he's the for sure number 1 guy, though.
Yeah, nothing's definitive with those 3 guys. And again, I think you said it best that this year is going to tell us a lot because, yes, Georgia has won 2 national championships in this decade, but we've had 2 different eras of college football within this decade as well, especially in the last 3 seasons. And now, TJ, we look at this Big Ten, and we're talking about it's really top-heavy. Who else in the Big Ten are you looking at as contenders here? As we're sitting here in August looking what teams can make some noise. We've gotten the big 3. Now, is there another team that's in this tier with the big 3, or are we starting to get into the second tier of Big Ten teams here?
I would put another team in that big 3 category. I like USC this year, and USC's got a tough Big Ten schedule though, and playing most of those teams as well. So we'll see. They have a chance to go prove it on the field on Saturdays if they're going to be considered in that tier or not. But I just think this is the best Lincoln Riley USC team he's had since he's been at USC in the trenches, especially. I think that's where they really rebuilt that team. Is USC was good in playing in the Pac-12 or Big 12 type systems, but now they're able to play Big 10 football because they finally feels like they finally have trenches on both offense line and defense line that they can finally push ahead and not be the inferior opponent up front against those top tier opponents. Of course, against the Northwesterns or the Purdue's of the world, they were kind of at least even or if not a little bit better. But now it feels like they should be able to compete with the Oregons, Ohio States, Indianas, Michigans of the world up front. Should at least compete. I don't know if they're going to be superior, but they should compete up there. I love Jaden Maava at quarterback. I just think this is his year. This is his year. It's boom or bust for him. I think that he can play himself into a very high first round draft pick if he has a really good year and Heisman type year at USC. He's they're behind that brand. You have a decent year at quarterback, then you're going to be put up in Heisman considerations really quickly. But this defense, I think this is the best defense that Lincoln Riley's had at USC, and I think that's one to watch out for. So I would put them in that tier. And a couple other teams that I would say are just outside that tier would be Michigan with Kyle Whittingham. I kind of love what they've done, kind of rebuilding that culture there and that locker room. I think that's gonna that coaching hire fits that program so much, and that culture that Coach Whittingham will bring in there will just be the ground and pound gap run scheme, and then another team to watch out for is Penn State. And I put Penn State up there because Matt Campbell, I think, is a really good hire for Penn State. And do I think he has the best roster he's going to have at Penn State of all time? No. I think he brought in a lot of transfers from Iowa State, but I think their roster talent is going to improve a lot over the next 2 or 3 years. But I think that schedule lines up for them just so good that they could be a 10-2, 11-1 team pretty easily, knocking on that door to the playoffs to where they have a chance to make a run at the end of the year.
No, I'm with you that I'll work backwards to what you said with Penn State. That schedule being so easy. But again, you have to remember that schedules don't play football games.
Mm-hmm.
The football teams have to play those games. And how fast can Matt Campbell get it together? There's not a team that you look on their schedule at the beginning of September where you say, like Ohio State, Texas is, you got to be ready to go. Penn State, it can take a week or two because their non-conference schedule is not that difficult. And then they end up having to play, I believe, USC and Michigan. They're not the world beater of the Big Ten, so they avoid somehow Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so if you look at schedule favorability, I think that is the argument for Penn State. But at the same time, I don't know that 10-2 Penn State gets in the college football playoff. I think it's around. I think they have to be 11-1 to be firmly in that discussion because of how weak that schedule is and not having a potential victory over one of those top 3 teams, Ohio State, Oregon, and Indiana. And then if that is the case, TJ, I don't know what the tiebreakers are going to look like, and there's no sense of having like a litigation fest in here about who can get to the Big Ten championship game if this team's this record and that team's that record. But Penn State could crash the Big Ten championship party, and then what? That's the
if
other
they
thing.
crash the Big Ten, they have an opportunity to play themselves into the playoffs. I have that
Right.
schedule pulled up for me actually right now too to kind of go through it. Marshall at Temple, Buffalo, Wisconsin at Northwestern, USC at Michigan, Purdue at Washington, Minnesota, Rutgers at Maryland. Like you said, they don't play any of the top 3 teams that everyone keeps saying is in the Big Ten, and then they're at Michigan, at Washington, and then have USC at home. That's really their 3 biggest games of the year. If they can go 2 or 3 out of those 3, and then cruise the rest of the way, I think that's a very likely scenario for Penn State. Still, that's the thing is Rocco Becht and most of these players are very familiar with Matt Campbell's system, and I assume one of those games, the USC game, probably will be a night game in Penn State Stadium. That's a tough place to play, especially coming all the way across country. So can USC pull that off? Can Penn State pull that off? We'll see. And the winner of some of these games for Penn State will kind of emerge them as if they are Big Ten contenders later in the year. Now, do we think they're real contenders or are they pretenders? That's a different conversation. But I think that schedule lines them up to have their record say they're at least a contender.
It's a perfect way to put it. And again, we're going to see what happens with Penn State and how fast that those players gel together. And then also that game against USC, that's the one you circled. That's your benchmark. And then what do they do from there? That trap game, I think, for them is at Washington, just like you mentioned. But then, too, TJ, we'll go back to Michigan for a second. I think Bryce Underwood, I think that's the key for the Wolverines of what they can do this year. They have Oklahoma coming to town in week 2. So Big Ten SEC, they're going to get to go toe-to-toe in week 2 here in 4 of the biggest brands in those 2 conferences, Ohio State and Texas and Austin, Oklahoma and Michigan and Ann Arbor. So I think those are, one, benchmark games for the conferences, but also I think you're going to learn a lot about those 4 schools in those games. I think, again, Michigan, you might learn the most because Ohio State and Texas, we know the echelon that they operate in the sport right now. And then Oklahoma, what they return, that defense is going to be good. We'll get into that when we talk about the SEC. But what does Bryce Underwood look like in that game? We saw what he looked like a year ago. He wasn't ready for that. He couldn't shoulder that environment. Now it's at home. You have another year under your belt. You actually have a quarterback coach. You've got Andrew Marshall, wide receiver. I think there's options. But again, Michigan going to be one of the most dominant running teams, I think, in the country. 100%. How far does that get them? That's the question there. Between Bryce Underwood's growth and that running game, how far does it get them? They're going to be solid on defense because Kyle Whittingham teams always are. But those are the areas to watch for the Wolverines, which, again, don't play an overly difficult schedule, but they need a lot to go right for them. And Bryce Underwood has to take a huge step forward if they do want to contend for that playoff. And then we'll round this out with USC, like you're saying. Jada Mayava, again, I'm with you, that I think that he could have a borderline Heisman caliber season if he plays to his ceiling. And again, USC, they get Oregon and Ohio State at home early. So that's one of the benefits to them. Lincoln Riley teams historically don't win the big games. And again, the physical games, you're not a believer. But they have built their team now in a way that they can compete in those games. Gary Patterson, that defensive coordinator. And when I look at USC, it does feel different for USC this year, but they still have to go on the field and prove it. But they don't have to go prove it on the road per se in their 2 toughest games against Oregon and Ohio State. Can they win one of them at home? If they win both, I think it's a completely different discussion of how good USC can be this year. But can they get one of them? They have one at the end of September, one at the end of October. And I think the game against Ohio State, dynamics-wise, is a more of an advantage for USC than it is disadvantage for Ohio State because Ohio State's going to be coming off a road game in Indiana, a bye week, and then they're looking down the barrel after cross-country schedule travel to playing Oregon at home. So that game is sandwiched in there for the Buckeyes. So is that the game that USC can get Ohio State? I think that's what I look at when I say how good can USC be this year. Those are the areas that I circle.
Yeah, I think kind of going back to it as well, USC brings back a lot of talent, and I don't think that people talk about that enough. You know, they put out a great returning production list that usually walks through, obviously, in the transfer era. That's a little different nowadays for some teams, but USC brings back the number 13 team in team production last year. Because I don't think that's something that needs to go untold. Because USC brings back a lot of their key playmakers in the certain areas. Obviously, they lose the 2 big wide receivers for them, and Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon. But they are going to replace those guys, and Jaden Miles is going to get his playmakers the ball. I have no doubt about that at all this year. It's can they win those big games at home? What puts them over the edge to finally get those things done? And those are the exact games I'm circling as well. Oregon and Ohio State. If they win one of them, I think they're in a really good position to have a chance to be in the playoffs this year.
TJ, over under 3.5 Big Ten teams that get into the college football playoff.
I would like to say over this year. I will say over just because I think the SEC is going to beat each other up a little bit more than people think and people expect. So I will say I think it's the magic number is going to be 4 this year for the Big Ten. 4 out of 12. I think that's a really good number for any conference to have 4 in. But we've seen SEC put up 5 before. So I think Big Ten can put up 4. It's just who is that 4th team? Can USC be that 4th team? I think they have to get one of Oregon or Ohio State to do that.
That question's coming for the SEC too, so don't worry. But let's transition into the SEC now, speaking of, and we'll start with Texas since they are the 5th ranked team in the country. And again, I wanted to jump there after we talked about Ohio State. A little bit of interesting intel coming out of Texas if you're reading on Twitter. But again, Twitter is not the news. So you don't have to read in too much to that because that's one of the most talented teams in the country. You don't want to just overreact because you see one tweet or you're not seeing this kind of coverage. this is one of the most talented teams in the country, TJ. There's no other way to shake this out with the Longhorns. They can absolutely win the national championship game. But what is it about this year's Texas team that feels different to you? It's similar in that vein to Oregon. You mentioned them in a grouping together with Notre Dame. It was Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame, that it just feels different for them this year. And those three programs have struggled to win the biggest games on the biggest stages in this era of college football. So why is this different for Texas? They add in Cam Coleman at wide receiver. Arch Manning, yes, is back for another season. Is it as simple as saying those things? Or is there another reason why you're a big believer in the Longhorns this year?
I think the portal additions and the recruiting class that they had this past year makes Texas a very very deep team. Obviously, they pushed out some guys that people thought before season last year, like, all right, these are some playmakers for them. With Livingstone and DeAndre Moore as well, those guys are not there anymore. They brought in Cam Coleman because they think that makes their roster better. They brought in some running backs they didn't have last year because they think that makes their roster better. If Arch Manning plays like he did the last couple games of the season this past year, especially in the bowl game against Michigan, that makes this roster so much better. And getting Trevor Gooseby back when I thought he should have been a second round pick last year and a first round pick when I was doing my NFL draft grades, having him back on in a college team this year is insane. And I know he's going through some injuries right now, but they think he's going to be back by week one, if not week two at the latest. So that's one to look out too. This offensive line should be still pretty good. They lose some big names up front, but they're going to replace those guys with a bunch of other big names that they've done on the recruiting trail here recently. And then you look at that defense. Colin Simmons just he looks at that defense real quick, and that's the guy. And they're going to have some guys emerge throughout that whole defensive unit as season goes on. But they have plenty of athletes and plenty of talent across that whole roster. But I think the biggest thing for me is that offense was the problem last year for most of the beginning of the year. I think that changes to become, instead of the problem, that's their strength that they lean on instead of their defense. They're leaning on their defense to keep them in the games at the beginning of last year. I think they're going to be leaning on their offense to outscore teams at the beginning of this year because I think that offense can be that good this year.
TJ, when you look at Texas and that offensive line, last year it took them about, let's say, 6 weeks, maybe it was 7 games or so to get going, to gel. They don't have that opportunity for that to happen again. So they've got to learn something. Again, you don't want to repeat something, and we don't think that's going to happen at Texas this year. But that is something to watch when it comes to that offensive line, because you're talking about the skill players, the quarterback. Arch Manning should take a step forward this year. If he doesn't, it's what it's going to be. It's what it's going to be at that sense. But the signs point to him taking that step forward. He has all the weapons. He has a good stable of running backs. But again, that offensive line has to be that anchor unit so that offense can fully operate. But when you look at Steve Sarkisian and his big game woes, what is it about Texas this year that, yes, you believe in the talent and the roster that they have, the product that they're going to put on the field, but also Steve Sarkisian is still coaching them. So why do you think that this is the year that Steve Sarkisian is able to get over that hump? Because there's talk out there with the schedule that Texas have, just in the same vein, TJ, we talked about with Ohio State, if they end up going 9-3, the loser of that game, yes, is in danger of going 9-3 because they have really tough roads ahead. Mm-hmm. But a 9-3 Texas, does that team have the same level of a playoff argument? Again, assuming both of these teams avoid the albatross of a loss. 9-3 Texas, are they in the same boat as Ohio State where they still have the argument at 9-3, or do you think they need to be more so 10-2?
I do think 10-2 is the key for Texas this year. I think 9-3 they need to have one of those big wins. Maybe it's Ohio State week 2 that they have to have. That's a really good win at the end of the year that they can hang their hat on. Is all right. Ohio State finishes 11-1, but guess what? We're the one loss for Ohio State this year. I think that's a really big thing for Texas if that's the case, if they're 9-3. But kind of going back to the whole Sarkisian thing with can he get over the hump? I think there's a couple coaches that are like that this year. Is it Dan Lanning? Is it Marcus Freeman? Is it Steve Sarkisian? I think those are 3 coaches that people look at of they have really good rosters. This is kind of a year that they feel like they've circled in the recruiting battles every year, and I think all 3 of those teams and rosters have a chance to do it. And it's more so I kind of hate when people put them on like they can't win the big one. It's not if they can win the big one, it's when they win the big one. I think we kind of saw that with Ryan Day recently as well. I think Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning, and Marcus Freeman can win the big one. It's just a matter of when. And in the next 10 years, all three of those guys will have a national championship. I would be pretty confident in that being the case with the way they recruit at all three of those programs, unless something dramatically different happens in the future that we can't foresee. I'd be shocked if those three guys at least aren't competing for national championships still. I think Steve Sarkisian and this Texas team, though, this is the offense that feels like, again, like I don't think Archman even needs to take a step forward. I think as long as he plays like he did at the back end of that season last
Right.
year, I think with the weapons he has around him this year, it's just so much better that he doesn't have to be great. He just needs to be good.
The good versus great again. He'll have to be great if the offensive line is not, but if the offensive line holds up, again, you can get away with him being good because of that supporting cast
Yeah.
that they have around him. And then again, defensively, they should be pretty locked down. But TJ, I think we may see a little bit more points scored in Austin than we did in Columbus between these two teams a year ago, 14-7. I think offense is going to be a little bit more on display for both of those teams when they go ahead and face each other. But you're talking about this Texas team where they can go ahead and win a national championship game and believing that it's just a matter of when for Steve Sarkisian. I know the other two coaches too. When I look at the teams this year that can win the national championship, how I'm evaluating that is I'm looking at two things particularly. One, the head coach coordinator combination, and then the head coach quarterback combination. Do I believe that quarterback can go win 3 or 4 straight big games to go win that title? And yes, as talented as Texas is, can Steve Sarkisian do that 3 or 4 times in a row in the college football playoff? Can Arch Manning put it together 3 or 4 times in a row in the college football playoff to play in these matchup games back to back to back against really good opponents? Or TJ, do you think that this is going to be one of those path dependent teams where, yes, they have a ceiling of winning a national championship, but if they maybe get one of the gimmies early and they draw maybe a Big 12 team where they get the 12 seed as the G4 or the G6 team, whatever it is now. Like, how do you evaluate Texas when they get into the playoff? Does it not matter who they play? Is this give us any team anywhere, anytime? Or is this they can win it, but I think they need the right path to be able to do so?
I think it's more so that they don't need a path. They just need to play their best football at the end of the year. As long as they're doing that, it's kind of like the situation with Ohio State and Indiana the past 2 years. You just got to make sure you're playing your best football at the end of the year and be confident with that. And kind of going back to that quarterback head coach relationship. Going into the year Ohio State won, Will Howard transferred into Ohio State, and people were like, "Oh, like he got pushed out as the guy at Kansas State. That's why he's transferring, and why would Ohio State take him?" Or Fernando Mendoza transferring from Cal to Indiana, like, "Oh, like yeah, he's a big name transfer, but that's not really going to help them out. They're not a good roster." People thought that with the last two head coaches and quarterbacks, that combination. What do we think about this one at the beginning? I feel like Arch Manning kind of fits the mold of like, oh, like he didn't start out good, but I mean he finished great. So what are we going to get out of him? I think that kind of fits the mold of those two guys more so than any other head coach relationship, quarterback head coach situation. I'm sorry. I think that fits the mold of the last two. If there's any team out there, I think Texas is the one that fits that mold. Now, do they have the same outcome? That's a completely different story and question. But I think Texas can take that next step this year, and I don't think it really matters what teams are ahead of them. We got to go up and line up and beat the best teams, anyways, at the end of the year. And we got to play our best football at the end of the year. Doesn't matter who's ahead of us.
TJ, talking about the quarterbacks, I want to make a transition to Georgia here and Gunnar Stockton. We look at this team that Kirby Smart has this year. They're going to be really veteran on defense. They returned some nice pieces on offense, and there's talk out there this is one of those Kirby Smart defenses that is just going to be able to take over games. But again, how much of a factor does the quarterback become for this team? I think that's something you say for all the contenders because there's some elite quarterbacks and there's some good enough quarterbacks. And I think Gunnar Stockton is one of the good enough quarterbacks. I don't think he's elite, but there's a path for Georgia. So when you evaluate the Bulldogs this year, they've not advanced far in the college football playoff at all in each of the last 2 seasons. So how do you evaluate the Bulldogs coming into this season with what Kirby Smart has? They bring back Gunnar Stockton, but also how veteran they're going to be on the defense.
Yeah, I think that defense has a chance to be, like you said, one of the old Kirby Smart defenses where they bring back so much talent on all facets and levels of that defense. Linebackers, there's just absolutely they got 4 or 5 guys they can run out there that would be the best linebacker on almost any other team in the college football landscape as well. Secondary, they got some absolute guys that will be early draft picks as well. Ellis Robinson being one of them, and then up front, they got Elijah Griffin, and in the interior wise, that they're some of the best in the country. Maybe if you had to circle a question on that defense, maybe it's who's that second edge rusher? Is he you know is he still a top 10 edge rusher in the country? I mean, I guess that's the kind of conversation you have. But Georgia's going to be um, absolutely on paper is what I would consider Georgia to be at worst a top 3 defense in college football this year at worst, and they have a very good argument to be number 1 on paper before the year starts. On offensively, I think this offensive line is going to be one of the best they've had in recent years. Yes, they lose a first round pick, Monroe Freeling, but I think they reshuffle that offensive line a little bit, and they're going to have a true freshman starting on the interior for them. And it looks like they're gonna be better up front offensively than they were a year ago. Bringing back some other guys in those places and reshuffling that offensive line a little bit, and then obviously Nate Frazier and Gunnar Stockton in the background backfield. That's gonna be a workhorse. Gunnar Stockton's gonna use his legs a lot more this year. I feel like. Um, just because the biggest questions for this team is at wide receiver. They brought in the transfer from Georgia Tech. They have Jacoby White back. They have London Humphreys back. What does that look like for them? I think that's the question mark on the whole team is at wide receiver position, and what does that dynamic look like? They have the 2 big targets that they can throw 50-50 balls to. Can they convert those this year? I think that's a question to look at. But Jacoby White, can he step into that Zachariah Branch role, and kind of be that playmaker for them in the underneath routes and in the screen passes and the jet sweeps? Because we know that Georgia team likes to do that. I think they're going to try to push the ball a little bit more vertically this year, especially with those 2 big guys that they have on the outside. I'd be shocked if that wasn't the case. But this run game with Nate Frazier and Gunnar Stockton is going to be lethal. I think you see Gunnar into more of a Stetson Bennett type role this year, using his legs. And they didn't have to have an elite NFL talent quarterback to win their 2 national championships before, and I don't think that's the case this year. They just need Gunnar Stockton. Not like you said. I think he's better than the good enough pool. I think he's still a top 10, top 15 quarterback in college football at worst. But can he consistently be that throughout the year and in big games too? Is the question.
You're talking about who is Gunnar Stockton going to throw to. And TJ, there's some really good secondaries that we've talked about already, and some that we're still going to talk about with Ohio State and Oregon. Mm-hmm. And then you look at Texas's, and then we're going to talk about Miami's, not to mention Notre Dame's, which might be the best in all of college football with Leonard Moore. So, again, if Georgia is forced to be one-dimensional, what does Georgia look like? And I think what you're saying with Nate Frazier and Gunnar Stockton, that could be the X factor that keeps defenses honest when defending them this year, the way that their personnel groupings are set up, because they are weaker at wide receiver than those national championship teams. They are weaker at tight end than those national championship teams. But you can replace talent in the aggregate, and it appears that Georgia has the pieces to be able to do that. But again, we need to see results on the field. We need to see what that looks like in that on-field product. And TJ, it's safe to say that Texas and Georgia, they're the top tier of the SEC right now. Do you group in any other teams on a tier with them, or do you think this is all a next level of teams now in the conference? And who are those other teams that we should be talking about?
2 teams that probably hate each other. There's 2 teams I'd group in with them. Ole Miss and LSU. Those are the next 2 teams that I look at. LSU's got one of the deepest. Yeah, Lane Kiffin and LSU. They have that. They have one of the deepest rosters talent wise this year. Now, how does that gel with everyone? A lot of new faces, a lot of big name transfers. And how does that really look for them? With a couple new quarterbacks at that system as well. It's going to look a lot different than LSU's looked accustomed to looking in the past couple of years, especially over their last couple of head coaches. Does that gel well? One, but 2, I think they have one of the most talented rosters to where they could be a legitimate contender. That could either be, if everything goes wrong for them, I think 7-5 is a realistic season. But if everything goes right for them and all the puzzles just fit perfectly, they could be a national championship team this year. That's kind of like they're one of the biggest unknowns in this preseason of like, I want to see 2 or 3 games at LSU and just kind of decide, all right, are they in that bucket or are they not? I think they have a chance to be in that bucket though, with Sam Leavitt leading that offense, and that defense should be really good with some of those transfers they brought in as well. And then Ole Miss is another one you look at just because any backfield that has one of the best quarterbacks in college football, Trinidad Chambliss, I will put up there no matter how good the team is around him. And Kawan Lacey at running back is probably the best running back in college football this year coming back. So go ahead with that backfield. I'll go ahead and put them up there. Now, do we think the rest of the system around them is as good as last year? I don't think that's the case. But can Pete Golden kind of build around them this year and find guys to step up in key situations? Um, I'm going to go ahead and bet on and say yes, just because I think Trinidad Chambliss is that much of a game changer in the college football landscape, and I'll go ahead and bet on him to be in that top category as well.
I'm a big Trinidad Chambliss believer as well. And TJ, I want to bring up the preseason AP poll again, just to remind everybody of these teams with the SEC, because there's a lot of SEC teams between 5 and 20. And if we look at these teams backfilling the top 10, at least with A&M and Ole Miss and Oklahoma, then you have LSU and then Alabama sitting down there. Crazy to say we haven't discussed Alabama yet. But TJ, do you see any of these other teams that could be in the mix of playoff contenders here in the SEC, or do you think it is just that group of teams of those 4 or 5 that we've discussed? Like, who else stands out to you? You know, you got Keelan Russell is going to be the starting quarterback at Alabama. What can Mike Elko do with a Texas A&M team that last year was good, but we knew that they were overrated because of the schedule? And now can they take that step forward? John Mateer at Oklahoma. Like, there's storylines across all these teams. But what is it going to take for them to be a contender? Or do you think that is the extent of the SEC playoff contenders right now?
I would say that's the extent of the SEC playoff contenders. If I had to see another team jump in that race, it would be one of two teams of, all right, Marcel Reed took the next step at A&M, and he's still got a good supporting cast around him, and that defense is still going to be pretty good this year. Mike Elko-led defense is always going to be pretty good, but Marcel Reed took that next step, and he was able to, I guess, really put Texas A&M into a playoff contender spot. Or Keelan Russell is just automatically a Heisman contender, and we didn't know anything about that preseason, and Alabama's and Kellen DeBoer are right back in that scenario that people kind of disrespected them at the beginning of the season. I will go ahead and go on record that I am not an Oklahoma believer this year, and John Mateer. I know we're talking about if there was a top 10 team in the preseason that we expected to be unranked if we had to pick one, because it seems like it's happened the last couple of years. Oklahoma's my pick for that. I'm a John Mateer believer, but after that injury, he looked completely different last year, and I don't really think that's going to change. So, everyone keeps talking about that elite defense. Well, that elite defense can hold you to 10 points, but if they don't score 10 points, I don't see that them winning games. So we'll see how good Oklahoma truly is week 2 against Michigan. But I don't think that's going to be a true test until they get to SEC play, because I think they could fall a couple more games and very well could be an 8-4, 7-5 team fighting to be ranked at the end of the year.
They do face one of the more difficult schedules, and you're going to, of course, make me stand all business on my own show here with Oklahoma, because I do think that Oklahoma can be a playoff team this year again because of John Mateer. But again, that injury point that you brought up is a key factor, and again, a lot is going to have to go right. But I think that defense is going to be really good, and I'm going to choose to believe the positive of John Mateer, that he's rehabbed that injury enough, he's had enough recovery time, and that he's going to be the quarterback we thought that he would be last year and that he was pre-injury. But if you look at this schedule, we'll just go right all the way with this schedule. It's UTEP at Michigan, New Mexico at Georgia. 2 really difficult road games right off the top.
Yeah.
Then they have a bye week. Then they have Texas that is going to be in Red River, Kentucky at Mississippi State, South Carolina at Florida. Always difficult to play in the swamp regardless of how talented that Florida is. Then Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and then at Missouri to end the season. So with great power comes great responsibility. And with the power I'm giving Oklahoma, they have a responsibility to back me up here and win these big games. But at the same time, because you're getting, and for those of you listening to the show, you're getting the range of Oklahoma in this take right now between TJ and me, because if Oklahoma's good enough, they're good enough, and they're going to win some of these games, and they're going to be in the playoff. But if they don't go their way, their floor and their ceiling, there's a wide gap in between that. It could be as much as 7-5, as high as 11-1, maybe 10-2. There's a wide range of outcomes for Oklahoma this year, and I think that is the thing that you have to be mindful of when you're looking at these teams. And yes, they fit the criteria that they could easily be unranked, but they also have the talent and the defense, and the head coach, Brett Venables. Can he, again, replicate what he did a year ago? Can they find the offense this year? I think that they can. And if they can, they will be a playoff contender because of how good that defense is. And then how does that shift around the SEC playoff picture? Does that take away? Do they beat Texas? Now all of a sudden Texas has lost to Ohio State and Oklahoma early, and now they have 2 losses, and you're sitting in here in the beginning of October like, what's going on in Austin?
Mm-hmm.
Or do they get the doors blown off by Texas? I mean, there's such a wide range for Oklahoma this year. I'm going to choose to believe they can make the playoff. I don't think they can win the title, but I think they can get back to the playoff. TJ, you think they could fall far down to unranked, which I would have to eat my words with a spoon on the show if that's the case.
I think it's a real possibility they could start out 2-3 this year. I think that's not crazy at all.
No.
two tough road games at Michigan, at Georgia. Then you have to have that rivalry with Texas at the State Fair. I mean, those are 3 tough teams that you got to play, and 2 of them are on, or really 3 of them are away. It's obviously it's a neutral site game for Texas, but
2.5 away games there.
Yeah, that's a tough start. But if I had to pick one team in the top 10 to finish unranked, it's Oklahoma. And if you have to pick a team in the top 10 to finish unranked, it's who?
Well, we're going to, again, bring up the AP poll just to show everybody their options here. I think that you're really going to make me say this.
Yeah,
there's a world that exists where Texas doesn't make the playoff. I don't think they'll fall to being unranked, so I'm not going to say that. If it doesn't come together, I'm not going to take the low-hanging fruit and say Texas A&M. I'm not going to take the low-hanging fruit. If it doesn't come together, Indiana could not be good enough this year. If they can't replicate. If it was lightning in a bottle last year, and this take might be absolutely insane, but if it doesn't come together and it was lightning in a bottle like some people think, Indiana could fall to being unranked even without playing a lot of good teams. But at the same time, you look at the range of outcomes. We just talked about Oklahoma. The range of outcomes is wide for Oklahoma. I don't think the range of outcomes is as wide for Indiana. I think you're erring more on the side of they're going to be a playoff contender and compete for the Big Ten. So this is not me not believing in Indiana, but I could see a world that exists, even though it's hard to fathom right now, that Indiana, if it was lightning in a bottle last year, could fall to being unranked.
So we're just going to go on record and say that I'm a Big Ten believer and you're an SEC believer is what we're saying, right? That's what we got out of this.
Sometimes you get put in a corner. It's really tough when it happens on your own show here. But I'm still a Big Ten believer. But man, Texas A&M is the obvious answer there. I don't want to go there. It could happen for Indiana. That's the thing. But I want to move on from this segment because we're gonna just move on. So we'll go. You know what? We didn't do the over/under. 3.5 SEC teams in the playoff, over or under.
I'll go under this year. I think we're going to see a couple other teams emerge from out of the other conferences, to where SEC teams kind of beat each other up, and they have a lot of 9-3 teams this year, or 10-2 teams that are fighting against a lot of 11-1 teams or 10-2 teams against other conferences. I'll go under, and I think it's going to be 3 instead of 4.
I like Big Ten Blake a lot better than SEC Blake, but I think there's going to be some allegations that are going to happen here. I'm going to go over for this. But I have a
Big
method
Ten
to
Blake
my
has
madness.
officially died. Big Ten Blake's gone.
No, he can't. He is alive and well and strong. But right now, SEC Blake is going to be here at the top of the show. When we get later on in the show, this will all make sense with my over-unders because we have a path that we're going to take for this. And Big Ten Blake will make a very strong resurgence. Let's go Notre Dame here, just independent real quick. I think when we look at the top teams in the country, we look at the Big Ten, we look at the SEC, some of us more than others. And then you got Notre Dame sitting there at the top. CJ Carman has been outstanding as a quarterback and how he developed a year ago. Expect him to take a big step forward. There are some really talented receivers for the Irish, but the big story here is that defense. I mean, you look at that defense led by Leonard Moore. They could be the number 1 unit in the entire country this year, and they pretty much have the de facto 1-game season. It's not quite a 1-game season against Miami, but it's a de facto 1-game season where it all comes down to Miami and they host them. Marcus Freeman's done a great job, and he was one of the 3 coaches you mentioned that is going to have a national title if all holds within the next 10 years. Is this the year that Notre Dame gets it?
I don't know if this is the year, but I think this is they have a really good roster, like I said at the beginning of the show, to do that. I like I said, on paper they have one of the top three rosters, and I think that starts with the defense. With Leonard Moore, KVA at linebacker. They have the transfer in from Pitt, Francis Brew, is I think confused if that's the right pronunciation on the back end. But that's a guy that Ohio State and Alabama and some other big name schools are really trying to get. Texas as well was trying to get out of the transfer portal out of Pitt. That's a really good transfer for the interior of that defense. That defense is stacked from head to toe at all different position levels. But then I think the strongest unit on this team this year is actually the offensive line. And this is a group that's pretty much all back from last year, and no really new faces, but all elite guys up front, and that will all be elite guys going into this NFL draft that we might see a little bit more of as the season goes on. And at receiver, Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and the two transfers from Ohio State, Molly Graham and Quincy Porter. Quincy Porter's a little banged up right now, but I expect the other three to be starting at the beginning of the year, and completely hold it down for CJ Carr in that backfield. And then a surprising name that people aren't talking enough about is Aeneas Williams at running back. That's a
Yes.
guy. They lost two running backs in the first round last year, first
Right.
round of the NFL draft. Two running backs off of one team going in the first round. I was already crazy. And then for you to say that they might have a really good running back again, that seems like an astronomical take. But I think that could be the case here for Notre Dame and CJ Carr. Everyone expects him to play at a Heisman level. I think he can take that next step. I just want to see it first before I jump on the CJ Carr hype train too. I think that's like an underrated player that everyone's kind of picked up this offseason that's kind of jumping on that hype train. It's almost to the point where I thought he was an underrated recruit or prospect coming into this year, to now I'm like, all right, maybe he's a little overrated now, because everyone's jumping on him. It's like, oh, he's a bona fide top 5 NFL draft pick. He's a for sure Heisman contender. It's like, all right, I thought he was really good too after last year, but let's pump the brakes a little bit. Let's see what he can do with this team this year. I think the schedule lines up really good for him. They have SMU and BYU and Miami. I mean, they have a 3-game schedule this year at most, and I would be shocked if they're worse than 11-1 this year. I'd be absolutely shocked. I can see them losing the Miami game, or if they win Miami, they maybe fall to either BYU or SMU. But I would be shocked if they lose more than one this year, and if they're not a top 4 to 6 team in the playoffs at worst.
I'm with you on that take. I agree with what you said. I don't need to restate all of that, but again, Aeneas Williams, I'm a believer in him and CJ Carr as well. And again, that offensive line, it's going to allow you time to operate. So if there is that gap for CJ Carr where he's not quite taking that step at the beginning of the season, he's going to have the pocket is going to be okay for him. He's not going to be under a lot of duress this year. He's going to have time to operate. He's going to be able to see the game that's going to come to him. And if it's a little bit faster at first, it'll slow down by the time Miami comes to town. It's not until November. So, yeah, they have the games against BYU. But again, I think it's just 1-game season for them. They've got Miami at home. Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor are not there anymore. Miami's going to be a lot more talented on the interior of that defensive line. That usually bodes well when you have a strong offensive line, because it's easier for edge rushers to get outside and around your offensive line than maybe get up the middle sometimes, because as a quarterback, if you have pressure from the inside, you can get outside rather than if you're just getting contained. So I think CJ Carr is going to have a lot of success this year. And I am a believer in Marcus Freeman, and I think Notre Dame is one of my teams that can win the national championship this year. And I think that if this is the year for him, that it's going to make a lot of sense, because they've built towards this, they've recruited towards this, and Marcus Freeman has elevated Notre Dame to a level that many didn't think was possible. They thought it was at the ceiling when Brian Kelly was there and it could not advance anymore. And now in this era, Marcus Freeman's a big player. Coach Notre Dame's going out and be able to spending money, but they're recruiting and developing at a high level too, I think is the other thing. Notre Dame's not bankrolling everybody like the Dodgers or the George Steinbrenner Yankees. They can pay, but they're also developing too.
Yeah.
And that's the case. So again, you're talking.
I think another big thing too is, I keep looking at this, the returning production number that you see. You look at the returning production overall of a team last year. Obviously, they bring in some transfers that are going to play this year too for you as well. Like we said, those 2 receivers, that defensive tackle from Pitt as well. But they returned 72% of their returning production from last year's roster, which is number 1 in the country.
Mhm.
They're number 2 on offense, number 19, or number 2 on defense, number 19 on offense, excuse me, in returning production in the country, which bodes well for them to be the number 1 team in the country in returning production. This is going to be an elite group that's played in the system, experienced in the system. They're bringing in a couple new faces that are going to learn the culture and fit their culture the best. But I think they plugged pieces into the right roles that they needed for this team. They had a couple holes that I feel like they filled with either freshmen or transfers. I think this is going to be one of the best rosters Notre Dame has ever seen.
I do too. This could be the best Notre Dame team in the modern era of college football, potentially even better than that national championship team that played for the game 2 years ago against Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. Again, you're not really going to know what Notre Dame is until they play Miami, but I am a believer that they will be as advertised. They may not win the game, but I do think that they're a team that can compete for a national championship. Yeah. And it does not matter where they fall in the bracket. I think that's the other thing. Because of that defense and that offensive line, it's anchoring them. Those are two anchor pieces to a team. When you look who can make a run, they check the head coach box, they check the quarterback box, but they have a good defense and they have a solid offensive line. So there's not going to be an instance like Ohio State a year ago that played a weaker schedule and they were dominant, but then they had that weakness up front in the offensive line and they got exposed a little bit. I don't think that's something that could happen to Notre Dame. I think it's going to be mano-a-mano line up and beat me is what's going to happen there. And I think Miami could do that and other teams could beat Notre Dame, but I also think that they could beat them too and be national champions here come the end of the season. But TJ, let's flip to Miami. I think that they're probably the only national title contender in the ACC. We've got the ACC and the Big 12 to talk about, so we'll kind of hit these back-to-back pretty quickly. Miami loses Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. They lose Carson Beck to the NFL, but Miami is loaded in the secondary. From what I'm hearing there, they're going to be talented on the interior of the defensive line. Darian Mensah coming in from Duke is a big piece. Malachi Toney and Mark Fletcher, other weapons, a three-headed monster on offense for Miami. This could be the Miami team that they wish they had when Cam Ward was there. I don't know if the offense is going to score as many points, but that offense is going to be dynamic, and they could probably score over 40 in a game because of the weapons that they have and the schedule that they face, as well as quality of opponent. And then again, it's that one-game season against Notre Dame. So when you look at Mario Cristobal's Hurricanes, how do you evaluate them going into this season, coming off a national championship berth a year ago, and again, like Indiana, has to do it again?
I think the biggest thing with Mario Cristobal is, can you win the games you're supposed to win? I think that's the biggest hurdle that he's had in his career at head coach. He's been able to pull off some of those big upsets, but he's not been able to always win the games that he's supposed to win. And then last year they were able to make sure they got in to the playoffs at that 10-2, 9-3 mark. But can they get over the hump and be that 12-0 team out of the ACC this year and just go through and dominate the teams that they're supposed to dominate? I think if there's ever a year for them to do it, it's this year. I'm a big believer in Darian Mensah. He was ACC Player of the Year last year for a reason. On that ACC championship appearance team, Duke, I guess, to look at. But then he also brought in his counterpart from Duke as well, Cooper Barkate, a guy that transferred in from Harvard to Duke, and then now he's following Darian from Duke to Miami. That's another piece at wide receiver that people need to look at. Him and Malachi Toney together, that's two different types of receivers that really mesh well together. Mark Fletcher, a top 3 running back in college football entering the season, in my opinion. I think it's, you look at top 3 running backs coming back this year, it's Kawan Lacey, Ahmad Hardy, and Mark Fletcher. Those are the 3 names that jump off the board for me. That I love all 3 of those games. I think those are pieces on offense that they can have, like you said, that Cam Ward type offense at Miami. But this defense is not something to kind of, they lost a couple first round picks on the defensive line, they're not going to be good. Like that interior defensive line, like we said, they got some big boys up there that got some real quality playing time, and they got 3 or 4 guys that they can rotate in there that can be real quality players at a high level this year. That could play on just about any team in the country. So I think that's not something to boat over either, but they should run through the ACC. I just want to see Mario Cristobal do it, finally. Run through the conference that you're supposed to run through and be that guy.
Exactly. And now, do you think that Miami's a team that can win the national championship, or do you think that they're just a team that can win the ACC, should win the ACC, could beat Notre Dame and make the playoff, but you don't think that they can win a title? Or do you think that their ceiling is national champions in January?
Well, I didn't think they could win the national championship last year, and they made it all the way there. So I'm going to say yes, just because I think that offensively they're a little bit more talented than they were last year, because that offensive line, yes, they lose a couple big pieces, but they have in some of the biggest and best freshmen at offensive line that are actually physically ready to play. up front that they're going to be playing there for. They're going to be starting there for 2 to 3 years at least. Some of those guys, because they're going to be 3-and-done players and go to the NFL because they're that big and that good. Jackson Cantwell, just to say one of them. But there's another big one that's going to be down there playing early at Miami as well. Maybe not till his sophomore year, but he has a chance to start this year as well. But I do think Miami can win the national championship this year just because they are easily the pick out of the ACC. They should be easily in a top 4 spot, in a bye week spot in the playoffs this year, just with how that schedule looks. It should only be a Notre Dame 1-game schedule for them. Now, if that's the case, I don't know. I would pick them over every team as the favorite, other than the Notre Dame game for them. And they should be 11-1 going into the ACC championship and hold their business there as well. But can Mario Cristobal beat the teams he's supposed to beat? I think they have the superior roster in that conference pretty easily this year. Can he beat the teams they're supposed to beat? That was the question.
I completely agree with you, and I think that if they do take care of business, they do win the ACC, but they drop the Notre Dame game. I still think that they're a top 4 seed in the college football playoff, and I think that they're a team that can make it to the semifinals. And then it's about closing out the season the right way. They know what it's like to get to the title. Mm-hmm. They've been there. They've had the experience. It's just about finishing the job. And that's what Miami has to do this year. Again, they've got to take care of their business, and then they've got to learn to hoist that trophy at the end. They avoided all trophies last year. There wasn't a trophy that they won in the championship games. And now this year, that's what they have to chase. That's the missing component from a year ago. TJ, anybody else in the ACC that you feel is a contender, or do you want to slide over to the Big 12?
I think some teams to look out for in the ACC that could make some noise is Louisville and SMU. They could make some noise. I like Louisville in that offense. Jeff Braun's just a quarterback mastermind, and they brought in the transfer from Ohio State, Lincoln Keenholz, who I expect to have a pretty good year. That could be the second best or third best quarterback in the conference. I think you also look at SMU with Rhett Lashley and that group. That they always have a good offense. Is that defense that good this year? I don't know. That's the biggest question for them. But I think Louisville's worth the mention to look at just because they seem like they're always a sleeper contender and they always make some noise against some of the top-rated ACC teams. Now, do they, I guess, run the table and get it done and make it to the, if not Miami, but category? I don't know. But those would be 2 teams I'd circle. And then maybe Clemson is a dark horse in the ACC. Just because Dabo Swinney, he's done it before. They lose a lot of pieces, though, and a lot of unfamiliarity in that whole roster. So can they do it? They have some wide receiver pieces that are back that should be really good still, but can they? What do they have around them? And can they win on a national level as well? That's the biggest question.
That's the thing for me when I look at Clemson is, yes, we know the dynasty of Clemson has passed, but it's not so much as the game passed to Dabo because he's not really wanting to use the transfer portal. He has used the transfer portal in this last offseason, which is tough to say and believe. But at the same time, is Clemson's national championship relevance and college football playoff relevance over? I think this is a year that will be the indicator for that, to show you it's like there will be signs type of situation here. And if Clemson is not able to compete for a fringe playoff spot, if they're not able to get ranked in the top 25, they're not in the preseason top 25, they were in omission. If you look at that, you're kind of like, man, we've not really seen that a lot in the last 15 years. What does Clemson do with all that? Do they just lay over? Is this it? Or do they claw their way back and get into the conversation again? I think that's what I'm most intrigued to see in the ACC, aside from what Miami's able to do this year. And TJ, now, if you're watching or listening, don't blink. You might miss the Big 12 segment. Texas Tech, man, do you bet on this team to go ahead and be a playoff contender, national champion contender this year? Or where do you think their ceiling is? No Brendan Sorsby. So how do you evaluate the Red Raiders coming into the season?
I'm in the very few minority that I think Texas Tech is for sure in the playoffs this year, no matter if Sorsby's playing or not. And I said that at the beginning, just because I'm a big Will Hammond believer. I think that backup quarterback Will Hammond last year, when he came in, he looks like he can be a dude. Now, can he take that next step and be the full-time guy all year long? That's another question. But I think he showed some poise last year and showed some dynamic playmaking ability. That he's got plenty of weapons around him. They have easily the best roster in the Big 12 this year. I mean, there's a couple teams that maybe rival that. Maybe BYU rivals that.
Right.
But I think it's really Texas Tech in the field. And then BYU's kind of in their own category at second place. And then there's a field again. So it's like, who really steps up outside of Texas Tech and BYU this year to kind of rival those two teams. But I think Texas Tech is going to be the clear favorite, and they should. Yeah, I would go ahead and pencil them in because I'm a huge Will Hammond believer. I think they'll be a top 6 or 7. Sorry, 6 or 8. I'm not gonna say that again. Top 6 to 8 team at least in the playoff contention at very worst.
I think they're in the playoff as well this year too. I think they're the class of the Big 12 right now. And again, it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback, even though it does. It doesn't matter in the regular season. I think it could matter in the playoff because, again, I think Sorsby has a little bit more playmaking ability than Will Hammond, but I do think that Will Hammond is good enough to get them to the playoff. Once they get to the playoff, TJ, I think it does depend on their matchups as far as they advance.
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable saying that they can make a semifinal. I don't know that they can make a quarterfinal. It depends. Are they the 6 seed? Are they the 8 seed? Do they jump all the way to the 5 seed? Where do they land? Do they run the table and steal a top 4 seed from either Miami, Notre Dame, or the top of the Big Ten or the top of the SEC? All those things are on the table. It's just how does this team finish the season, and then what matchups do they draw in the college football playoff as far as their ceiling is concerned? I do think that they're a playoff team. I'm 85% confident that they make it to the playoff. I think BYU will be your second option. Maybe they are the second team that gets in. But again, for any Big 12 team, it's very path dependent on how far that they advance. For me, when I evaluate how that conference fits the mold of this season's story, when you look at what could we expect come December and January.
And I think the Big 12 is very open though too. Like there could be a couple teams that emerge out of there that we have no idea preseason wise right now, just because there's so much unfamiliarity at certain important positions there. There's not a lot of returnings quarterbacks at that stage. So what does the head coach quarterback relationship look like with some of those teams too, and who emerges out of that conference outside of the Texas Tech BYU, and do they make a real running for those two teams as well? I think that's very doable this year. That there's a team that can come out of nowhere that no one's really expecting, and if there's ever a conference to come out of this year out of the nowhere, it'd be Big 12 for sure.
It would have to be, and I'm going to pull up the top 25 here again, TJ. We talked about what teams could fall out of the top 10 by the end of the season. What teams do you see in this top 25 that can insert themselves into being a playoff contender? You see those teams really outside the top 10. So let's go from LSU to Missouri. What teams do you see that could potentially jump into that top 10 and be a playoff contender?
There's one team that I keep hearing so much buzz about that has a pretty easy schedule ahead of them too. That I will go on record to say that I think it's a possibility. That Iowa team. I think that Iowa team's got a chance to insert
TJ
themselves
alive and well.
Because you look at that Iowa team in their schedule. It's Northern Illinois, Iowa State, Northern Iowa, at Michigan, Ohio State, at Washington, at Minnesota, Wisconsin, at Northwestern, Purdue, at Illinois, Nebraska. I mean, the 3 teams that I'm looking there and I'm kind of scared of for them is Michigan, Ohio State, and Minnesota as a rivalry. I'm not really even worried for Washington for them because I just feel like they're just such a matchup nightmare for Washington with the style of football and brand of football they play. I mean, if they get Michigan and if they run the table, and there's a chance that they're 11-1. Obviously, that schedule's not going to be as flashy as some others in the Big Ten, but there's a chance that Iowa's 11-1, 10-2, and knocking on the door late in the season that they could be in there as like, all right, hey, we're fighting for that 10-11 spot after the G6 team and whoever else makes it that has to make it for the 5 power conference champions.
So we see why TJ took the over on the 3.5 for the Big Ten. We see why he took the under 3.5 for the SEC. So the other part of these questions that I had, TJ, which I know we talked about off air a little bit. So that's a 12-team field. We did 3.5 for both conferences. Now we're going to move to the quarterfinal round. So 8 teams left in the field. Over under 2.5 teams for the Big Ten and for the SEC to advance into the quarterfinals. Over under 2.5.
I think that's where it can get tricky because I think those conferences could play each other. So it's like,
that's
what seeding?
You could say over for both. You could.
What seeding does that look like? I would lean towards over for Big Ten for sure. If I think there's at least 4 teams in, I'd be shocked if at least 2 of them aren't in the bye already to make it to the final 8. and then one has to just win a game to get in. SEC wise, I'd be shocked if there wasn't, like I said, the winner of that conference is definitely going to have a bye, so they're going to be in there already. Can that Texas or Georgia, whoever is not in that leading role of the SEC, can they make it in? I think they can. But who's that third team that emerges for them? Is it Ole Miss? Is it LSU? Is it a sleeper team that I'm not expecting? Is it the Oklahomas of the world or Texas A&M? Or is it Alabama with Keelan Russell? Um, I would lean towards over for SEC just because I think unless the Big Ten has just 5 teams in the top
So
8, I'd be shocked though.
So here's the thing with taking the over on both. That makes at a minimum of 6 teams already of the 8, which leaves Notre Dame and Miami. So are the quarterfinals made up of 3 Big Ten, 3 SEC, Notre Dame, and Miami? That is essentially what we're saying.
I think that's a very good possibility.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's a very good possibility. Because I really do think Notre Dame, Miami are going to be in the top 4 this year. No matter I think it's going to be really hard to find a way to not have those 2 teams in the top 4. One's going to be 12-0, one's going to be 11-1. I'd be shocked if it's anything else. And I just have a hard time seeing both those teams not in the top 4 this year. So they're already go ahead and put them in. It's like, all right, you're kind of banking on, all right, is there 3 SEC teams, 3 Big Ten teams? I guess when you more so put it that way, I feel like you have to be safe and go over one and under the other. But I for the fun of the sport, I'll go over on both.
That's
Big
good.
Ten TJ's giving SEC some love.
I'm over on both as well. And the reason why we would not be is if Texas Tech decided that they're all of a sudden going to be a top 5 seed and they end up playing the G6 school. But
or if it's like Iowa goes to LSU and they beat LSU, or or USC goes to LSU and they beat LSU. That's the only way I can see it doing something different.
Yep. So now we'll move it to the semifinal round, over under 1.5 teams. This is where Big Ten Blake is going to recover really well. And I'll say this even before you give your take. I don't think the SEC gets a top 4 seed in the playoff.
They don't get a top 4 seed, or they don't make a top 4. They don't
get a top 4 seed. I'm not saying a team won't make a semifinal. I'm saying I don't think the SEC gets a top 4 seed.
Ooh. Okay, so you think 2 Big Ten teams and Notre Dame
and Miami. I do. I think it's Ohio State and Oregon, and then I think it's Notre Dame and Miami. That's not to say that the SEC can't get to a semifinal, because we'll get there.
Yeah.
I think the world exists where the SEC does not have a top 4 seed in the college football playoff, which is going to make the South go bananas when that playoff is released.
Wow. So the question is over under 1.5 teams in the semifinals.
1.5 teams to make the semifinals. So do you get 2 Big Ten teams in the semifinal? Where do Notre Dame and Miami shake out? And then do you get 2 SEC teams in there?
I do think we
could get 2 Big Ten teams. You could take the under on both like that.
I think we get 2 Big Ten teams. I'd be shocked if 2 of Oregon, Ohio State, Indiana, and whoever that 4th team ends up emerging to be, whether it's USC, Iowa, Michigan, Penn State, whatever that other team is. I'd be shocked if that's not the case, and we get 2 of those guys in the semifinals. I don't think there's a world where you get 3 though. I think that's for sure not in the cards. Yeah. I'll go under for SEC. I think Georgia's a team that's gonna bounce back in playoffs this year. I'm a big Texas believer too, but I think Georgia's gonna make a run this year, and I don't think Texas is gonna pull it out in the playoffs. I feel like they're gonna get a bad schedule, and bad draw, and not end up doing it at the end of the season.
So who would your top 4 teams be at the end of the year if you're looking at your semifinal matchups right now? If you need me to give my first, I can. But who would your top 4 or your final 4 teams be in the playoff?
If I had to pick today, I'm going Ohio State, Oregon, Notre Dame, Georgia. Those are my top 4 teams.
Do you know the matchups that you would pick?
I gotta see what seeding would be. I guess it'd probably be Ohio State versus Oregon. It'd probably be Ohio State versus Oregon, Notre Dame versus Georgia is what it'd end up being.
Yeah. How I built my college football playoff bracket out, I don't have it written down. It's in my mind. I'll write it out soon, but I just know where it starts. I kind of built it from the inside out. I said, who do I think is the best chance to get to the semifinal? Because I think that they're going to be the 4 best teams. and then I would build my bracket out that way to get them in there. I think a world exists, and again, I'm back and forth because I have it. There's a pool of 6 that I think the top 4 is going to come from, but I can see a world that it's Ohio State and Miami in one semifinal, and it's Notre Dame and Texas in the other semifinal.
So who's the other 2
Oregon,
teams that you're just missed?
So Oregon will be right there as well, and Georgia.
Yeah.
Oregon and Georgia will be right there. Now,
we mentioned the same 6 teams pretty much.
We did. I think the national champion comes from those 6 teams. I give Indiana the benefit of the doubt and make it 7 because they did it last year, and I believe in Curt Cignetti. Just again to cover myself on my take from earlier, there is 7, and now I wrote an article that had Indiana as a contender before this show was recorded and aired, so I'm on written record saying that as well. But I do think that the national champion comes from that pool of teams, and I think it would just be a ratings bonanza to have the Ohio State Miami rematch, Jeremiah Smith against the hometown team again for a chance to go to the national title, and then Texas Notre Dame. I mean, sign me up, give me popcorn, and let me be on the sideline.
I just want to make sure we preface this though. You said 6 teams were a real semifinal list for you. And you threw Indiana there as a bone, given the bone. But you also said when we're going back to the AP poll, top 10 finishing unranked. You also your team was Indiana. Your team. So
listen,
Big Ten Blake is not a thing anymore.
I didn't want to pick Texas A&M, but I said I do. I'll say it. Those top 6 teams I think are where the national champion is going to come from. Indiana, I think you have to give them the benefit of the doubt, but those 6 to me, Indiana being the 7th, those 6 to me, I think the national champion comes from there. I don't think Indiana repeats.
Yeah. Awesome.
There's my complete rounded out Indiana take for everybody this year. I hope Curt Cignetti's not watching, but that's my complete rounded out take on the Hoosiers here.
You're going to have to put the clown nose on just like Josh Pate did.
I may. We'll have to, I'll have to ask him for one. If not, we should get a chalice of supremacy for that pick. Might be a little bit of a bold P there. So
I love it. Awesome.
But man, TJ, all right. So fun show. We got all the way down to the Final Four. What are your closing thoughts here? We're just, again, days away from college football. We've talked all the contenders that we talked about. We looked at teams that could be jumping up into the picture, who could fall out of the playoff picture. What are your closing thoughts just to wrap all this up, tied up with a bow?
I think this year's going to be very open for the playoffs, especially in the back half. I think we have like we said earlier, we have a pretty good understanding of a group of teams that we think have the chance to be really elite and make that deep run. But I think it's going to be really open, that we can see teams that have better records that might not be playoff caliber teams that we don't think beforehand. 2 teams that come to mind, their schedules, Iowa and Penn State, are 2 teams out of the Big Ten that could make a run at the playoffs and could be very surprising for people. And there's probably some teams at SEC that feel like they're that way as well. So we'll see how this college football landscape shakes up. The regular season is the best part of college football. Is any given Saturday you can see whatever comes about, and all the upsets and all the conference standing reshakes that kind of come about. But I think we have a good grasp of who we think are going to be the real elite teams, and then we'll see them come playoff time and see how that really shakes up. So I think it's really up for grabs this year. I don't feel like there's 1 or 2 teams that were like, all right, it's going to be back of the old days. It's Alabama or Clemson this year. Like it's right. Whoever's winning that game is winning it all. I think this new NIL era is making it more fun to where a lot of teams have a really good grasp and roster and landscape around the world, around the country, I guess, and have a chance to go do something special in the regular season and make their point and prove their point in the playoffs.
You're right, and I think resume is going to matter a lot this year, which again is pretty similar to what you were just saying. And I think the regular season is going to produce a lot of great matchups for us this year. So I'm excited to see it. I hope we continue to protect the regular season because it is what makes college football so great. I do think that 12 is the right amount of playoff teams. I don't think that we need to go ahead and expand outside of that because 12 is the right number. Again, Notre Dame on the fringe last year, knocking on the door to get in. That tells you that you have the right amount of playoff teams. You don't want to make it 16 or 24. And you're sitting there with like 18 through 24 can't win a thing. That's because the playoff is too big. When it was 2, you could argue that there was people getting left out. When it was 4, you were arguing teams could get left out. 12, I don't know if the 13th ranked team in the country every single year is going to be able to win a national title. I think there's got to be exclusivity to it. So I think that 12 is right, and I'm glad that we have another year of it, at least for now, before anything changes.
I'm a proponent of getting away from the bye week in the playoffs. I don't know how you do it. Do you go down to 8? Do you go to 16? I definitely don't want 20 or 24. That's for sure. I don't think those type of teams can win a national championship. But I'm a big proponent of getting rid of the bye week in the playoffs. So we'll see if that happens. But I don't know.
What's it, 14 or 16 that gets rid of the bye week?
16 would get rid of the bye week. Or if you downsize to 8. So I think downsizing though is not the way to go nowadays.
They're not going to allow it to be downsized. Before this got to 12, I thought 8 was the right number. I do agree about the bye week. So if that was the reason, I'll be okay. Because again, just continuity. I think
the only team that's won on the bye week is Indiana.
Completely different episode. That is true. Kurt Signett is the only team that went on a bye week. That's fair. But yeah, that would be my reason to expand it if that is. But I do think that 12 is a good number. But again, that calendar conversation, show for a different day. But TJ Warner, tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, at TJ Warner _ on Instagram and Twitter. You can find all the content I'm running over there. And then you can check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. I'm running plenty of premium subscription options at recruiting for Ohio State and all things Buckeyes over there.
There we go. And again, if you need recruiting coverage, TJ is the place to go get it. One of the best in the business. So make sure that you guys are following along. Our content can be found at Blake Biscardi or at T-Silver-Bulletin, tsilverbulletin.com. Again, guys, we appreciate you listening to the show. Again, National College Football. We hope that this felt like that conversation with the boys, that you guys are just sitting out talking ball for an hour and a half. Off air, we set the over-under at the show for 90 minutes. We are sitting at 96 minutes right now. So the over cashes again. It was a theme on this show, which we figured might happen. But guys, again, we appreciate you listening. That is TJ Warner. I am Blake Biscardi, and we will see you guys next time. God bless.